Hey guys! In today's video, I bring you a breathtaking story. Let's meet Cyrus Thorne, a former firefighter who faced death and spent 9 minutes on the other side. What he saw will completely change his view of California's devastating wildfires and what they really mean. Prepare to discover a shocking truth about spiritual forces, divine messages, and the urgency of transformation in our lives. Before we start, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell so you don't miss any incredible stories like this. Now, let's dive into this breathtaking journey together. My name is Cyrus Thorne. I spent 38 years in the fire department, dealing with what most people will never see in their entire lives: despair, destruction, and sometimes miracles amidst the chaos. I don't say this to exalt myself. I'm just a man who did the necessary work while the world around me burned in flames. Literally. However, I never imagined that the fire I spent years fighting would have a meaning far beyond what I understood. It was January 15th, 2025, a cold, sunny morning in Sacramento, California. I was on my way to a small church downtown, where I was attending a fire safety training event. This type of work became my routine after retirement, a way to share my experience and maintain a connection to the mission that defined me for so long. The car radio played softly as I mentally reviewed what I would say to the participants. I remember looking at the clock on the car dashboard, 9:13. It was at that moment that the pain hit me. It wasn't something gradual. It was as if an invisible fist had crushed my chest, stealing my breath and all the strength in my body. "It's okay, Cyrus, breathe," I muttered to myself, trying to stay calm. But my vision started to go black and my body seemed to sink into the car seat. The last thing I saw was a blur of lights and cars around me before I lost consciousness. When I woke up, I was no longer in the car. He was no longer in Sacramento, nor anywhere that could be described as normal. I was greeted by something that seemed both familiar and incomprehensible, a living, pulsing light that enveloped me as if it knew me deeply. And so my journey began. What I'm about to share may seem unbelievable to many, but I promise it's all true. What I saw and heard changed my life forever and gave me a mission I cannot ignore. The world is in danger, not just from the fires we see, but from something much bigger and darker. When my vision went dark, I expected there to be pain or fear, but to my surprise, there was only silence. A silence so deep that it seemed to cover everything around me, like a blanket of peace. The chaos of the world disappeared, and for the first time in years, I felt a relief that was almost impossible to describe. There was no more pain in the chest, no feeling of heaviness in the body. I knew I had left something behind, something important. Then the light came. It wasn't like any light I had ever seen before. It didn't come from a light bulb, a flame, or the sun. She seemed to be alive. It vibrated and pulsed in golden and white tones, surrounded by a heat that didn't burn, but comforted. It was as if that light knew me better than I knew myself, reaching parts of me that I had long forgotten or buried. As I was enveloped by the light, I realized I was not alone. A presence was with me. It was not a human figure, but something I can only describe as pure consciousness. There were no words, but the communication was clear, like thoughts placed directly into my soul. "You are safe here, Cyrus," the presence said, not in audible words, but in a way that echoed within me. Safe. Where? Where am I? I didn't know if I had said it or just thought it, but my question was immediately answered. You are in a place between time and space, where all things are seen as they really are. The phrase made me feel a mixture of peace and curiosity. I began to float, being gently guided by the light. There was no ceiling, no floor, no horizon, but a sense of movement told me I was traveling. As I followed, visions of layers of reality emerged. It was as if I was seeing the fabric of the universe being revealed. Each layer revealed something different: people's suffering, their hopes, their fears, and, in some, a darkness so thick it made my heart sink. "What are these layers?" I asked, still trying to understand. "They are reflections of the world you know. They are the marks left by choices, actions, and spiritual distance." The explanation seemed clear and, at the same time, impossible to fully process. I knew I was just at the beginning of something much bigger. I was led by light through layers of reality that seemed endless, but each had a purpose. As I went through these layers, I felt emotions so intense that it was as if I were experiencing millions of lifetimes at the same time. Finally, the light stopped moving, and in front of me appeared something that I cannot fully describe, but I will do my best. It was a presence, but not a figure as we imagined. It was bigger than anything I could conceive, radiating love and power in equal measure. If it could be compared to something, I would say it looked like the beating heart of the universe, and I was in front of it. There were no visible words, but direct communication that flowed seamlessly. "You know the weight of fire, but you have never seen its true origin," said the presence, its voice echoing within me like soft yet compassionate thunder. I don't understand," I replied, or I thought. I no longer knew how to distinguish. My heart, or what was left of it on the physical plane, seemed to absorb everything like a sponge. The fires you fought all your life are more than just natural elements. They are physical manifestations of a spiritual corruption that has accumulated over generations. Every flame, every devastation is fueled by forces beyond what human eyes can perceive. I was paralyzed. That seemed impossible. I have always considered fires to be disasters caused by human negligence or nature. There was no room for spiritual forces in my understanding. And yet, in the face of this presence, doubting seemed absurd. "These forces," he continued, "feed on human emotions, fear, anger, apathy. Where the spiritual darkness is thickest, the fires are fiercest. It is no coincidence that places of greatest spiritual remoteness face the greatest devastation." Images began to form around me. I saw vivid shadows, like moving figures, hovering over fires. They seemed to absorb something from the flames, but also from the people around them, as if feeding on their hopelessness. "But why? Why is this happening?" I asked, feeling a knot of despair growing inside me. "It is a reflection of human choices," replied the presence, with infinite patience. "Spiritual disconnection has created a void that these forces fill. But where there is true light, these forces are weakened." I felt small, but also full of purpose. What should I do? Take this truth to the world. Tell people there is hope, but time is short. The presence began to recede, and I knew our conversation had come to an end. As the presence receded, I was enveloped by a whirlwind of images so vivid that I seemed to be living each one of them. They weren't just scenes, they were realities I could feel. The first visions were of forest fires. Ravenous flames consumed everything in their path, but this time there was something different. Shadowy, indistinct figures moved among the flames. These figures were living shadows, with shapes that never fixed, always changing, like smoke. They didn't just exist among the flames, they fed them, not with wood or oxygen, but with people's despair and fear. It was as if their emotional energies were sucked into the shadows, making the flames even more intense. I tried to look away, but I couldn't. It was as if I was forced to absorb every detail. The presence, which was still with me but now distant, conveyed a clear thought. These forces do not start fires directly, but they influence the human actions that create the conditions for them to occur. I saw a negligent man discarding a cigarette butt in a dry forest. I saw builders destroying ecosystems out of greed, ignoring warning signs. I saw leaders turning a blind eye to climate change because it was more convenient to maintain the status quo. Each action seemed small and isolated, but shadows gathered at these human failings, creating perfect conditions for devastation. Why do they do that? I asked mentally. The answer came with a weight that almost crushed me. Because these dark forces feed on what you call negative emotions. Where there is fear, anger, and spiritual apathy, they thrive. They cannot exist in the light of true love and genuine faith. I was then taken to areas where the impact was less. Small communities resisted the advance of the flames, not by luck, but by something much deeper. I saw people praying together, not just reciting words but actually connecting to each other and to the divine. It was as if their actions created barriers of light that repelled the shadows and reduced the intensity of the fires. "These are the areas of light," the presence explained. "True faith communities that prioritize love, compassion, and spiritual action. They weaken the forces of darkness and create havens where evil has less power." At the end of the vision, I felt the weight of a crushing truth. The fires were not just natural disasters, but also signs of a spiritual collapse. And worse, they were just the beginning unless something changed. After the revelations about the fires, I was enveloped by another series of visions. They were not just scenes of devastation. They were fragments of a possible future, a path that humanity was following. The presence, which remained like a consciousness around me, seemed more serious now. The first sight was of a colossal fire, bigger than any I had seen in my life as a firefighter. California, my home, was surrounded by flames that seemed alive, advancing with supernatural speed and ferocity. Entire cities were engulfed in fire, and the living shadows I had seen before were more active than ever. They danced among the flames, feeding on people's emotions: fear, despair, anger. The streets were chaotic. People were running, screaming, but there was nowhere to run. However, what struck me most was not the screams, but the silence in other parts of the world. Many watched the disasters from afar, through screens, indifferent to the suffering. The presence explained, "Spiritual and emotional apathy is as destructive as fear. She gives power to the shadows." The view changed to another scene. I saw not just fires, but other disasters: floods, devastating storms, the collapse of infrastructure. I saw people turning against each other in growing desperation. Communities crumbled, and families were divided. The social fabric was tearing apart, and the entire world seemed to be spiraling into self-destruction. "Is this inevitable?" I asked, a knot squeezing my chest. The answer came in the form of a new, more hopeful vision. In small communities around the world, I saw people gathered in prayer, not with empty words, but with genuine faith. I saw families helping each other, churches becoming points of light, and even strangers coming together to create something beautiful in the midst of chaos. These places were not without challenges, but shadows could not penetrate their light barriers. Fires still occurred, but were less devastating. Hope and genuine faith were like an invisible shield, protecting these communities. "The future is not written," said the presence. "Humanity has the power to choose. But time is short. Spiritual disconnection needs to be reversed before the consequences become irreversible." The last vision was clear: a crossroads, with two paths ahead. One led to spiritual renewal and light, the other to total destruction. Suddenly the vision stopped. The welcoming warmth of the presence began to weaken, as if it were moving away. The feeling of absolute connection was replaced by a light pressure, almost like a pull. I didn't want to go. The peace I felt there was indescribable, and the love that enveloped my soul was something I knew I would never experience again in the physical world. "Why am I coming back?" I asked, the voice inside me carrying a mixture of fear and resignation. The answer came clear but purposeful: "You have a mission. What you saw must be shared. They need to know there is still time, but the window is closing." Before I could respond, I felt my being, or whatever I was in that state, being pulled hard downwards. The light began to disappear, and the physical world, which I had already forgotten, returned like a crushing weight. The transition was abrupt and uncomfortable. The first thing I felt was pain, a searing pain in my chest, as if a truck had run over me. I heard voices, muffled sounds that began to gain clarity. "He's back. We have a pulse." A paramedic's voice echoed next to me. My eyelids slowly opened, and everything seemed blurry. The overhead lights of the ambulance, the worried faces around me. My body felt strange, heavy, as if I were a stranger inside it. "Sir, can you hear my voice?" asked one of the paramedics. I just shook my head. My throat was too dry to speak. I felt the oxygen entering my lungs with difficulty, as if I was learning to breathe again. "You went into cardiac arrest, but you're stable now. Let's take you to the hospital," he continued, his tone trying to be reassuring. As the ambulance made its way to the hospital, my mind was a mess. The visions, the messages, everything I had experienced was still imprinted on me, as clear as a fire burning in front of me. The feeling was overwhelming, as if I were carrying a burden greater than I could bear. Lying on that stretcher, I knew my life would never be the same. Something inside me had changed forever, and more than that, I knew I had no choice. I needed to share what I had seen. The world needed to hear. After I was discharged from the hospital, I was greeted by Miriam, my wife, who held my hand as if she didn't want to let me go again. I was physically weak, but the real weight I carried was spiritual. The visions and revelations I experienced would not leave me alone. As the world seemed to return to normal around me, I knew nothing would be the same. "Are you well?" Miriam asked, her voice thick with concern. "Not exactly," I replied, hesitantly. I need to tell you something, but I don't know where to start. That night I sat with her and revealed it all. The light, the shadows, the messages about the fires, and the call to share this truth. Miriam, always patient and understanding, listened to me without interrupting. When I finished, her eyes were full of tears. "Cyrus," she said softly, "this is bigger than you, but I think that's exactly why it was chosen. You have to tell this story." Convinced by Miriam's unwavering faith, I decided to act. My first step was to reach out to Reverend Eli Harper, a local pastor and longtime friend. When I walked into his office at the church, he seemed confused but welcoming. "Cyrus, what happened to you?" Miriam told me about her cardiac arrest. "How are you?" I took a deep breath before responding. "It's not what happened to me, Eli, but what I saw. I need your help to understand and, more importantly, to share this with people." I explained everything again, in even more detail. Reverend Harper listened attentively, and at the end he closed his eyes for a moment, as if he were silently praying. "Cyrus, I believe you," he said, with a seriousness that gave me strength. "But it won't be easy. Many people won't want to listen. Some will call you crazy. But if this message is from God, then it needs to be shared, no matter the cost." With Eli's support, I began speaking at local churches, small community gatherings, and even schools. But, as he had predicted, it was not easy. Many reacted with skepticism or disbelief, some even mocked me. "Spiritual fires, dark forces, this looks like a bad movie," said one man after a talk. Still, there were those who listened with teary eyes and open hearts, thanking him for bringing a message that awakened something in them. These moments gave me the strength to continue, even when criticism threatened to silence me. However, the real challenge was dealing with my own fear. I constantly asked myself, what if it's too late? What if no one listens? But each time doubt arose, the words of the divine presence echoed in my mind. "Take this truth to the world. There is hope, but time is short." As I shared my experience, I realized something profound. The message I was entrusted with was not just a warning, but also a call to practical and spiritual transformation. It was not enough to talk about the fires as manifestations of spiritual corruption. I needed to show people how to fight the shadows and create light in their own lives. One evening, during a meeting at a local church, I encountered a small but attentive audience. Among them, there were entire families, elderly people and curious young people. After describing my experience, I noticed that many were moved, but also confused. A man raised his hand. He had a serious but not hostile expression. "Cyrus," he began, "you talked about how apathy and fear fuel these dark forces. But how can we, ordinary people, make a difference? We are only human. We don't have the power to face something so big." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility to respond. I remembered the visions of light I witnessed, the communities that resisted the shadows with their genuine faith. "You're right. We are only human," I began, looking at the audience. "But we are also capable of creating something much greater than we imagine." I continued, explaining what the divine presence had shown me. "The first thing we need to do is reconnect. This doesn't just mean going to church or reciting prayers. It means living faith, transforming our actions, our relationships. Love and compassion create light. Every small act of kindness weakens the shadows." I told them about the communities I saw in my visions. They weren't perfect, but they prioritized what mattered. Families gathered to pray, not automatically, but from the heart. Churches became beacons of genuine worship, not just buildings filled with empty rituals. People helped their neighbors, even when they didn't have much to offer. These acts, however small they may seem, create barriers that dark forces cannot cross. There was silence in the room. Then a woman stood up. She was holding a child's hand and had tears in her eyes. "So you're saying we still have a chance if we stick together?" I nodded. "Yes, but time is short. We cannot wait for greater signs or for someone else to act. Each of us has the power to start now." That night, something changed. People started committing to small changes in their lives. Some brought their neighbors together for prayer and study meetings, while others reconnected with long-estranged family members. They weren't grand actions, but they were significant. As I watched these transformations, I realized that the call to action was not just for others. It was for me too. My mission was not just to share what I saw, but also to live the message. After all, if I didn't embody it, how could I expect others to? Looking back, I realized that my life will never be the same since that day when my heart stopped and my soul was taken to the afterlife. I carry with me the images of the devastating flames, the hungry shadows, and the powerful light that showed me the way back. But most of all, I have a responsibility to share this truth with the world. My journey has not been easy. I often face criticism, skepticism, and even hostility. This is just another story made up to scare people. I heard from a retired colleague, a firefighter I respected for years. Although these words hurt me, I remembered the visions I had and the divine presence that told me that the truth needs to be shared, even if not everyone is ready to hear it. At the same time, I also found hope. I saw ordinary people begin to change their lives. Inspired by the message I shared, I saw separated families reconcile, communities unite in prayer, and churches become centers of true worship again. Little dots of light have begun to shine through the darkness, and that gives me the strength to keep going. I learned that the call to action is not just about grand gestures or collective movements. It's about what each of us does on a daily basis. It's about prioritizing love and compassion, facing fear with faith, and replacing apathy with action. Every decision we make can create light or feed shadows. The future depends on these choices. Still, I can't ignore the sense of urgency I carry. The visions showed that time is running out. The fires are just a symbol of something much bigger, the spiritual collapse that threatens to consume everything around us. If we continue to ignore the signs, the consequences will be inevitable. My mission is simple but powerful, to plant seeds of hope and transformation. I don't know how many of these seeds will grow, but I know that my duty is to sow, even if I never see the harvest. The message I received wasn't just for me, it was for everyone. And what we do with it now will determine the fate of our families, our communities, and the world. So, I end this report with an appeal. Choose the light, love more deeply, act more courageously, and reconnect with what really matters. Because time is short, and the shadows don't wait. If you liked this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment on your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.